The offer. Upon exiting the submarine, the imagined light my weakened brain had produced in the confined and familiar enclosure was gone, and I had to rely only on my portable light, which still managed to operate feebly, even though the indicator was in the bottom. The untapped power of the human mind must be considerable to allow such a thing, and I regretted not having the opportunity to perform a scientific analysis of the phenomenon. As I ventured up the steps into the darkness of that primal shrine, still driven by the powerful urge, I felt the pressure upon my brain easing considerably. I had to stop myself from imagining this was because I was following the will of whatever entity was affecting me, because such a thing is impossible. Instead, I congratulated myself upon the fact that my iron German will was reasserting itself, even if it only was for a short period before certain death would follow. In my dry bag, I carried some nautical instruments and tools, my automatic pistol, and 2 Model 24 hand grenades. I didn't imagine I would use any of it, but it is always better to come prepared. I was, however, scientifically interested in whether I could manage to detonate a hand grenade from outside the dry bag, or, if I needed to open it, this supposedly water-resistant mechanism would actually withstand seawater immersion for the required 4.5 seconds before the explosion. The heavy diving suit and all accessories weighed upon me as I moved through the cold, oppressive corridors of the submerged temple. Hours had passed since I began my exploration, and the incredible structure stretched out before me in a maze of ancient passages. The carvings, weakly illuminated by my dying light, that already had displayed impressive longevity, were vaguely pre-Hellenic, an astonishing sight, filled with strange figures and symbols I could not begin to understand. My air supply was finally running out. My lungs burned, and my vision began to blur at the edges as exhaustion and deprivation set in. I pondered if it was time for my Model 24 experiment, but I eventually decided simple suffocation might be the more elegant option. It was then that I stumbled upon an elevated, strangely dry room. With my last strength, I clambered up a short ramp out of the water, the suit dripping heavily onto the stone floor. To my amazement, the chamber seemed entirely air-filled, which was of course impossible. However, there being nothing to lose, I set about removing my bronze helmet, having brought the appropriate tools in my dry bag. Even with the tools, this was not an easy task, and I was very near suffocation when I finally managed it. I took a deep breath of the thick, almost unnatural air and allowed myself a moment of relief. How could it be that I was still alive? I closed my eyes and continued drawing breaths and enjoyed the sensation. I must now weigh the likelihood of my mind creating these scenarios in perfect visual and tactile detail, versus the other very remote possibility that I was actually not imagining any of this. My mind was much clearer now, and I quickly reassessed the last several weeks since the sinking of the Victory that had led to this point. I came to the conclusion that I had nothing to lose by allowing the possibility of the existence of some malevolent psychic entity, extraterrestrial or otherwise. Rather, if such unlikely creature did exist and was preying upon heroic German U-boats, I would be remiss in my patriotic duties if I did not act to defend the fatherland against it. As I let this fact sink in, I raised my eyes with newfound purpose, however obscure, and finally noticed the stone table in the center of the chamber. Upon it was what appeared to be a plate with food and a goblet of wine, untouched by time. A new game, I surmised, as I struggled out of the rest of my diving suit, either concocted by my dying brain or the entity. I decided to play along and look for an opportunity to strike back. My most likely recourse would be to use the Model 24 hand grenades in some fashion, but I had also my revolver handy. Hopefully, the entity was not aware of recent technical advances in munitions. The wine was amazing, reminiscent of a particularly fine and complex Spätburgunder, but with some hint of unusual age. Emboldened by the quality of the drink, I attempted a little of the food, which seemed to be vegetables of unknown type, but it was not to my liking. I stood up and started to walk around the chamber, looking for structural weaknesses. I steadied myself as a whispering voice spoke directly into my mind. In what language, I could not say. It whispered dark promises, power beyond imagining, the chance to escape death, and dominion over all who dared defy me. I clenched my jaw, stubbornly refusing to entertain such thoughts. A man is his word and his loyalty to a greater cause. I turned my attention back to the structure of the room itself. The carvings on the walls twisted and danced before my eyes, and I realized that the entity was growing agitated, sensing my defiance. I moved deliberately, inspecting the chamber's walls and the carved supports that seemed to hold the ancient structure aloft. There, a weak point. My fingers brushed against a crystalline material embedded in a crack in the wall. It seemed to pulse faintly, as though alive. Perhaps this strange substance could amplify an explosion. Nevertheless, the spot was likely my best opportunity. My hand went to collect the grenades from my bag in order to place them as I noticed a movement behind me. I went instead for the automatic pistol and started shooting directly as I flipped around. There stood the very handsome, but supposedly dead Greek-looking youth we had found on the deck after the sinking of the Victoria, smirking at me, the bullets seemingly doing little damage. "Will you not reconsider?" the youth asked with a melodious voice, now in perfect German. With my final bullet and a marksmanship practiced since childhood, I swiftly shot out one of its eyes and had the satisfaction of seeing it stagger backwards, glee apparently turning to anger. The creature seemed to be recovering after only moments, so I swiftly dislodged the 2 hand grenades from the bag and placed them as carefully as I could in the few seconds I estimated were at my disposal. The entity's voice grew louder and more insistent in my mind, promising me glory if only I would serve. But I ignored it, focusing on this, my final task. When ready, I immediately pulled the pins and stepped back, bracing myself for the explosion that I hoped would occur in the next few seconds, and that hopefully would do significant damage. Even in my agitated state, I felt a tinge of dread when I glanced in the creature's direction and saw it being in the nightmarish process of metamorphosing from the handsome youth to a gelatinous, aquatic, and fully monstrous being. Then everything seemed to happen at once as the grenades went off. I was thrown backwards by the force, as was the creature. The cold sea rushed in, quickly reclaiming the chamber. I had sustained great damage, and my death was only moments away, as I surveyed the damage done by the grenades. It was disappointing. There was indeed some damage to the walls, but not nearly the catastrophic effect I had hoped for. The entity, now fully transformed, was regarding me with its many eyes, apparently having already brushed off any effects of the bullets and of the grenades. I spat out a curse, my defiance unbroken. "I will not serve," I growled, my voice echoing through the chamber. Oceanic water rushed in from every crevice, and I was left gasping, my vision darkening as the crushing cold enveloped me. As the water rose above my head, I fought to stay conscious, my lungs burning, my limbs growing heavy. The entity's laughter echoed in my mind, my final act of resistance swallowed by the abyss, and pitifully inadequate. But yet, the being seemed intent on allowing me to drown peacefully, and in that restraint I sensed a grudging acknowledgement of my German resolve. The cold embrace of the water was now absolute. I could hear the eerie hymn begin anew, a reminder that I had never reached the inner sanctum. As my consciousness faded, my last thoughts went to my sons. The grandson. My name is Hans Friedrich, Graf of Altberg-Ehrenstein, even though such titles have lost much of their meaning. Half a century has passed since my late grandfather wrote that fateful missive from the bottom of the sea. It took only a year or two for the manuscript to find its way from the shores of far Yucatan to our castle, and into my grandmother's hands, for ours is a very wealthy family, and wealth attracts all manner of things. My father was fascinated with it, but it was not much he could do, given the technology of his age. The unfortunate Second World War put an end to his life, as indirectly the First did to his father. My mother's work as a nurse with the Rotes Kreuz allowed us to preserve our standing and fortune after the war, and during the last decade of my stewardship, our family's star has continued its rise. That is why I am able to write this passage, seated in the owner's cabin of the Karl Heinrich, having already embarked on the grand and potentially vastly profitable venture of claiming and excavating the ancient sunken city my grandfather found. Aboard this vessel are scientists and expert divers not only from Germany, but also Mexico. Some of these experts have spent years narrowing down the surprisingly accurate coordinates my grandfather managed to provide, in spite of him being, in his own words, in a state of disastrous impairment. I would be remiss to claim that the search has not been costly, and indeed that even a few divers were lost. But at last, the ruins have been exactly pinpointed, at a surprisingly great depth, one might add. We are now at the edge of that abyss we seek to explore. The Karl Heinrich bobbing gently on the blue waves, the sea stretching infinitely in all directions. Aboard, the scientists, divers and crew members are occupied with preparations. Their conversations a blend of German, Spanish, and scientific jargon. I watch them with admiration from the deck, knowing full well the dangers ahead, but also in tremendous anticipation of the discoveries to be made. Many have warned me of the unpredictability of the sea, but none could dissuade me from this mission. I should mention that aboard this vessel, and soon to be lowered into the sea, is Leopold, a prototype of what will become the world's most advanced submersible, outpacing even the FNRS-3. While we have spared no expense, certain systems and solutions are experimental. Tomorrow will be a glorious day, one I have been anticipating for several years. I will go down in the Leopold together with 2 specialists, and I expect our findings to be exceptional. This might very well lay the groundwork of the Altberg-Ehrenstein family becoming the wealthiest and most famous in Europe. Note from the captain of the science vessel Karl Heinrich, at an undisclosed location several nautical miles off the coast of Mexico. We have waited and searched for the submersible Leopold for over a week now, and in the process lost our most senior diver. The Leopold must on all accounts be considered lost with all hands, including the beloved director of our company. God rest their souls. We must abort this search now and seek port before our supplies run out.